Welcome to Vine Pruning by me, Cass Turnbull. I work for an organization called Plant Amnesty, and our sole mission is to promote better pruning, including the pruning of vines. Even though this is a slideshow on the topic of vine pruning, it is brought to us by grantors that are interested in trees. That would be the Washington State Department of Natural Resources, the Community Forestry Division, and the USDA Forest Service, which is an equal opportunity employer. They would like you to know that. And in this slideshow, there is hidden a slide on trees that is very important. So stay tuned on the slideshow of vines to find out about trees. Here we go. Vines are basically plants that have no backbones. So their mission in life is to climb up on a nearby shrub or tree and get the daylight by racing to the top and covering the top with their own selves, sometimes to the detriment of the tree or shrub. People think vines are delicate, but they just look that way. They can take a great deal of very hard pruning, some harder than the others. There are a lot of problems with vines that can be addressed by pruning. One of them is that they can be very aggressive. Some vines can cover a lot of territory in a short period of time, and some of them are actually quite strong and can do some damage. That would be your wisteria. Another thing that can be modified with pruning is the fact that many vines develop ugly legs after a while. As they're racing up to the top of whatever you've given them to climb on, the bottom becomes defoliated and doesn't look as attractive, and your flowers are all up on top where you don't want them. You want them down lower where you can see them. And also, many of the vines develop leaf problems, which is bacteria and fungus, leaf spots, various unattractive problems with leaves. Sometimes just the old dead leaves hang on and look horrid. And pruning can sometimes make that more acceptable. And when I say aggressive, I mean they can take over. This is not an extreme example. This is what can happen easily to you if you're not careful. This is what I mean by legs. This is a wisteria, which has climbed up on top of a tree, and down below looks pretty crazy. And this person may really have wanted the wisteria vine lower down instead of on the top of their tree, or maybe not. It really depends. But pruning can help you keep your flowers lower if you so desire. And this is what I mean by leaf cruds. This is an akebia vine, and it just gets some deadish-looking leaves. Even though it's evergreen, it's not looking so great in the winter, and pruning can help. This is a clematis, and they are notorious for going deciduous in the fall and hanging on to these incredibly crummy-looking, dead, hanging leaves. You think the vine is dead, and it isn't dead. It's just got a lot of dead leaves hanging on it, and that can be not exactly what you wanted for your beautiful garden. But first, let's talk about vines according to their mode of attachment. And why does that matter is most of the trouble people have with their vines is they've given it the wrong kind of a thing to attach to, or simply not enough of it. And just knowing what your vine wants, just like knowing what all your plants want, is the key to happiness. The first kind of plant is a clinger, and this is a plant that hangs onto a flat surface with aerial roots that look sort of like this. This is a aerial root and stem of an ivy, but many other vines will hold on to walls using something like this. So when you're thinking of a clinger, think in terms of like an octopus. It needs something flat for those little suction cups to hold on to. Another kind of plant is a twiner. And twiners hang on to trellises, not walls, some sort of trellising, and they use little tendrils that act sort of like twist ties and hold themselves on to the lattice, or in many cases the wire or the string that you have put up for them. And twiners vary in how big their tendrils, which is to say their little hands, are. And if you don't get them the right size trellis to grow on, they can't get up and they just flop around on the ground and are just not very happy. When you think of the twiners, I want you to think of Indiana Jones and his bullwhip. You know, he would use that bullwhip to wrap around a branch and then swing over the hole in the ground. Well, that's what a twiner does, is it uses those little tendrils to wrap around. See, this is what they look like. This is a little sweet pea, and it's coming up, does every year. You plant your annual sweet peas, and this is how they will get up. And notice that they have to have little tiny bits of wire to hold on to. If you had a great big fat lattice, it might not be able to get up. And then there are your hooking vines. And actually, they're not vines, as they are technically climbers. Vines have no backbones. Hooking climbers do. And an example would be a climbing rose, which is sort of woody as opposed to soft. But its mission is also to climb into your tree and climb up to the top of it. And it will use these little thorns kind of like a grappling hook. Think of a pirate with a grappling hook. And he swings it over to the ship next door and swings over. So the climbers, hooking climbers strategy for getting up is using these thorns. There's really only two of these. That would be the climbing rose and the bougainvillea, but they're worth mentioning. But before we go any farther, let's talk about the basic kinds of cuts. In pruning, there are only three basic kinds of cuts. There's the removal cut, which means you take a branch back where it began as a bud. Of course, they've changed the names of the cuts, just like they changed the name of everything, which is pretty irritating. And when I get pronounced Queen of the World, we're going to stop renaming things, especially governmental agencies. But I think it's actually a pretty good thing that they changed the thinning cut into a removal cut, because a removal cut indicates that you remove the entire branch right back to where it began as a bud. And this is a good cut, and the cut that most people prefer to use when they're pruning trees and shrubs. And then there's the reduction cut. Used to be called the selective heading cut. Now it's called the reduction cut. And this is how you make something shorter the good way. You follow the branch of your shrub that's too big. You follow it down to where it meets a side branch or two and cut it off there. And if those side branches are big enough, they will take over as the branch ends. The new growth is forced through them. You don't get water sprouts. Your plant looks natural, and it doesn't matter when you prune it. It will always bloom. The reduction cut. It's a good cut. The third kind of a cut is called a non-selective heading cut, and it's what gets most people into trouble when they're pruning their trees and shrubs. That's when you just sort of whack off the tips of things, and you tend to get an upsurge of messy, unruly regrowth called water sprouts. So we try to stay away from non-selective heading cuts or heading cuts, except in a few notable situations. That would be shearing your shrub, pruning your fruit tree, pruning your roses, and when you're pruning vines. When you're pruning vines, you're frequently using the heading cut. Even though it's scary, and I've spent a lifetime convincing you not to use this cut, there are some good times to use this cut, and one of them is when you're pruning those vines, who I sort of think of as the juvenile delinquents of the plant world.